Good evening and welcome. Welcome to those of you who have come in person, and for you live streaming, welcome. My name is Kathy Beatty with Divorce Support Anonymous. I have had the privilege and honor of walking alongside men and women going through the trauma of divorce. In my support groups, I have seen your tears. In individual coaching, I have seen your anger. As a court-appointed domestic mediator, I have seen your loss. But the most difficult part is when you are dividing your time with your children. I see your pain, just like the pain that I experienced over 23 years ago. Welcome. I know as parents that you are tired and you are hurting and you need help. And so tonight, we wanted to love you in the best way that we know how. And that is to provide help and support as you go through the trauma of divorce, of how to help and work with your children. I work with adults, but I have gathered tonight experts who work with children. Experts who are going to give you practical tools, real tools that you can use even yet tonight. I asked them for that specifically, and they did not disappoint. You see, God is not done with your story, and God is forming the story of your children right now. And you need help and support in doing that. So for tonight, so you're not feeling like you're drinking from a fire hose, we have short segments. The longest interviews and presentations are 30 minutes. There are many 10 minutes, 5 minutes, even 2, that are going to give you help and support. And I am so excited to deliver this to you. If you have not received the handout, for those in person or those who registered ahead of time, please go to my website, divorcesupportanonymous.com, and download this. It's very, very simple to do, and you will have that. You'll also have all the resource information that you need for our speakers. So, practical tools, I've said that already, but I want you to know that we want tonight to love you and to help you and support you in going through the trauma of divorce and dealing with your children. Tonight is all about the kids, but it begins with you. I had a woman several years ago come up to me after a conference and say, "Kathy, I don't care about me. Just get my kids through this divorce." And my response to her is my response to you. And that is, what your kids need most of all is a healthy parent. So we want to start with that tonight. We want to talk to the parents here in being healthy. Now, before we get started, I do want to mention an issue of guilt. And I want you to know that this is a no guilt zone. Many of you are carrying so much weight in going through the divorce, guilt on actions. Maybe you were the person to leave the marriage. Tonight, I don't want you to feel any shame or any guilt, because when we do that, our brain shuts down and we can't be open to learning and absorbing. So I want you just to relax, to take a deep breath, and to listen to what the experts are going to bring to you. It starts with you. Just this week, I received an email from a gentleman who said, "I'm just too embarrassed to reach out for help." Friend, you need help. This is a trauma that you have never been through before. And you need support and you need information. And we want to give you that tonight. You see, we've got our work cut out for us. The statistics are not in our children's favor. The statistics are that our children are not doing as well in math, in reading. Those are the statistics. But it's not just what the slide shows. of our children being behind. And I give you this not to feel bad or to feel shame, but to be determined and to listen to what the experts have to say so we can put in place those mentors, those good people in our children's lives, so we can work with this. And it's not just academically, it's also behaviorally. If you see the next slide, you're going to see that there are the behaviors that our children coming from one-parent home are not performing as highly as those who come from two-parent homes. So I say this to make you determined, not frustrated, not hopeless, but determined to step into this incredible responsibility that we have tonight. So we're going to focus first on ourselves. And tonight, our first guest speaker is Leslie Vernick. Leslie is a well-known counselor, life coach, and author of 7 books, including the national bestseller, The Emotionally Destructive Relationship and The Emotionally Destructive Marriage. She leads support groups for women coming out of destructive relationships in her group called Conquer. She is a coach to other coaches and counselors, of which I'm honored to be a part. Her work speaks to the core of being emotionally healthy parent first, so we can have healthy relationships and be a healthy parent. Leslie Vernick. Leslie, thank you for joining us today. I'd like to get into the conversation directed to the parents themselves. Can you tell us why it is so important for parents to be healthy person first before they can be a healthy parent?
Well, that's the ideal. Unfortunately, most of us don't think about that before we have children. And having children actually motivates us to want to get healthy because we love our children. We want them to grow up healthier than we are. But you know that old phrase, put your own oxygen mask on first? It's not a phrase that implies selfishness. It implies that you cannot care well for those around you if you are gasping for air yourself. And so in the same way, we have a lot of teaching to do as parents to our children to help them mature into healthy, responsible, God-centered young adults. And if we don't know how to do that ourselves, if we're not mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, physically healthy, then we don't have those abilities to pass on to our kids. And so we do need to learn to be healthy. And God often uses our children to point out our areas of unhealthiness, whether it's we don't know how to control our temper, we don't know how to control our emotions, we don't know how to set limits on kids, or whatever it might be. We're going to learn that or have the opportunity to learn that by being a parent. And it's important for us to understand that God uses our children to teach us areas that we're weak in and areas that we need to grow in ourselves so that we can be better parents.
I love that when you say that our children teach us, because indeed they do teach us. So you teach core strengths as a way to be emotionally and mentally healthy. Will you explain what this acronym stands for and why developing these strengths in ourselves will make us better parents?
So just like our physical body requires core strength, and most of us have heard that if you don't strengthen your core, especially as women or even men, you're going to grow up and you're going to be hunched over as an older adult, or you might not be able to keep your balance very well because you don't have enough core strength to hold yourself steady if you start to get off balance. And so in the same way that we need to build our physical core strength and maintain that core strength even as we age, and we need to build emotional core strength and spiritual core strength so that when the storms of life come, or the challenges or the obstacles come, we know how to handle them on the outside, but we also know how to handle ourselves on the inside. So it's an acronym that's got 4 components, CORE. And the first one is, I will be courageously committed to the truth. No more pretending. Part of being emotionally and mentally healthy is walking in the truth. God says, I have no greater joy than to see my children walking in the truth in 1 John, the Bible says. And so God calls us to the truth. He says the truth will set us free. But by nature, we exchange the truth of God for a lie, the Bible says. And so we are self-deceived and we deceive ourselves. And so to learn to be courageously committed to the truth, and it's not necessarily always about out there in the circumstances, although it might be, but also in here. I recently had a situation where I had to confront someone on something that they did that was very inappropriate toward women. And he was unable to see the truth. He wouldn't look at it. He didn't want to feel bad about what he did. So it was easier just to deny the truth to himself. But he can't grow, he can't change, he can't learn from this experience until he sees the truth. And sometimes the truth is painful. If you have a big old black mole growing on your back, it's painful. Or if you find a lump in your breast, it's scary. But if you don't face the truth, then you can't heal, you can't work on it, you can't do something about it. If you just live in denial, or you refuse to see, or you just, have this optimistic Pollyanna attitude, well, everything will be fine because I believe in Jesus. That's not mentally or spiritually or emotionally healthy. So C is I'm courageously committed to the truth. And part of our jobs as parents is to teach our children the truth, because they will think lies as well as we do. I remember just working with a little girl one time, and she tended to be very introspective and very hard on herself. It wasn't her parents who did that. It was just in her to do. She's a little perfectionist. And her brother was playing with his pet hamster and it was running around the room. And she opened the door to walk in the room and she stepped on the hamster just as it had run under her foot. She didn't know the hamster was loose. And she just beat herself up and beat herself up and beat herself up. It's all my fault that the hamster died. I'm a bad person. And it was her parents' job to help her embrace the truth. This was an accident. It's not your fault. But if they don't know to do that because they don't do that themselves, then they can't be good parents. So C, I'm courageously committed to truth. O is I'm open to new ideas. I'm open to learning from wise others. I'm open to hear from God in fresh ways. I think in our society today, most of us are closed, defensive, and shut down. We don't want to learn from Republicans. We don't want to learn from Democrats. We don't want to learn from Muslims. We don't want to learn from women. We don't want to learn from men. We think we know it all. And that isn't healthy. And so humility says that we are going to be open to learning from wise others about things that we don't know, things that we think we might know that we don't know. Just like this man, I tried to give him some information about the ways that he was disrespecting women, and he didn't want to know. He didn't want to hear it. He wasn't open. And so if you're going to be a healthy parent and a healthy person, O means we have to stop being so defensive when people try to give us feedback. We have to understand that God has put people in our lives to give us feedback so that we can grow into the person he calls us to be, both positive feedback and sometimes negative feedback. I'm grateful when my girlfriends say something to me, even about my physical appearance. I remember a friend saying to me, Leslie, you've got lipstick all over your teeth. Clean that off before you go speak. Just simple things, but feedback. It says, let a righteous man strike me. It is a gift. Let me not refuse it. And so being open to learning and growing and people giving us information about ourselves, positive or sometimes hard to take. When my husband handed me a Tic Tac and said, before you go talk to those people, you got to cleanse your breath. I didn't like hearing that, but being open to he's got my back. He wants to help me do my best. He's not trying to humiliate me or hurt my feelings, even though it wounds our ego. He's trying to help me. And so being open is really an important part of good mental health. R, I'm going to be responsible for myself and respectful toward others without dishonoring myself. Now, Kathy, this packs a wallop. It's a ton of work to unpack this and figure this out. But I think for women, we have sometimes been overly responsible for everybody else's life and not responsible enough for our own. The Bible tells us, for example, that we are to guard our heart above all else, for it is a wellspring of life. Well, who's to do that for us if we don't? The Bible tells us that we are to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. But who does that for us if we don't? If we're so busy tending to everybody else's lives and taking responsibility or over functioning for things that they should be doing, our children, our husband, our mother, instead of stewarding our own life first so that we can give appropriately, then we won't understand boundaries and how to live our lives in a healthy way and have healthy relationships. So taking responsibility for myself isn't just about owning my sin. Like when I shared with this gentleman that he was disrespectful to women, I wish he would have taken responsibility for himself. But it's not just that. It's also taking responsibility for your growth. You're supposed to grow into someone who God's created you to be. The caterpillar changes into the butterfly, or the acorn changes into the oak tree. And who does that? God does that, but he does that with your cooperation. He who has begun a good work and you will complete it. But sometimes we become very passive, especially as women, and we think our life consists of our roles, like wife and mom, and there's no more to us than just this role. But that's not true. So taking responsibility for ourselves helps us to continue the maturing process through the lifespan. Learning to be respectful toward others says that we have to take responsibility for how we say things and how we manage our emotions, because we can be emotional and we can lose our temper and say things in disrespectful ways, which not only dishonors another person, it dishonors ourselves. It's not the person God called us to be. So that's the R step. And the last step is E. I will be empathic and compassionate, because God calls us to even love our enemies, but without enabling destructive behavior to continue. So this is a tough call sometimes for especially parents, because we feel sorry for our kids, and so we co-sign on a loan, or they can't pay their bills, so we rescue them. And so or our husbands had 15 affairs, and we keep taking them back because we feel bad for them and we don't want them to have to suffer through a divorce. But yet we're actually enabling this destructive behavior to continue. So how do we learn not to have boundaries with hatred, like I hate you and I'll never forgive you and that's how I stay strong? But how do we get strong, like the Proverbs 31 woman who is described as strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future unafraid? How do we get that kind of strength as a woman, as a man, as a person, and still have compassion and care for those who have needs without taking responsibility away from them to do their own work to grow up as well? So that's core.
And that sounds like it takes a whole lifetime to accomplish.
Well, in some ways, I'm really glad you said that, because I think we have this wrong idea that when I'm 18 or I'm 21, I'm like mature. And we're not. We're not spiritually mature. Sometimes we're not emotionally mature. And so we are to mature throughout the lifespan. And I'm, in my 60s now, I'm not the same person I was when I was in my 50s. And I'm not the same person I was in my 30s. And if I were, then that would mean I was immature for being the age I am. And so our job is to continue to be open and to learn and to grow. And sometimes the more aware that we are, and the more awake we are to the spiritual dimension of life and what God is really saying, the more we see we need to grow. It's not a process that we're finished with by the time we're 21 or 25 or 65. It's something that's throughout the lifespan that we continue to do.
Wonderful. Leslie, you have been very transparent in speaking and telling your story, your childhood story. And I would love to hear, and I know that would be helpful for many, when you made the intentional decision that you would not parent your children as you were parented.
Yeah. So my parents got divorced back when divorce was rare. Single parents were rare. My mother left my father when I was 8 years old. And she took my younger brother, sister, and I to Chicago, and we lived in an apartment. And my mother had a lot of mental health issues, which I didn't know about. I was just a kid. But she had bipolar, and I never saw her depressed, but I saw her manic. And when she would get manic, she would get scary and very abusive and dangerous. And so we lived like that. I was the oldest. She took out her anger on me a lot. She drank too much, which was probably trying to medicate some of the other stuff that was going on in her, self-medicate. But she worked full time. She's a single mom. It was hard for her. I have a lot of empathy as an adult for what she went through, both as a child and as an adult. But as a kid, I didn't know any of that. All I knew is that my mother didn't love me, and she was hurtful at times, extremely hurtful to me. She knocked my teeth out. She slapped me in the face one time, and my head went through the back door of my porch. Just different painful things that she said to me as a person. And so by the time I was 14, my father, who had become a Christian and had remarried, had been petitioning the courts for years to get custody of us, because he knew my mom's behavior. And, courts rarely gave custody to dads in those days, but my father won. And so by the time I was in high school, my sister, brother, and I had to go live with him. Now, by the time I was in high school, my mother was still as bad and crazy as ever, but I was a little bigger and I was a little bit more able to get around her than I was when I was littler. And I had the freedom to do what I wanted because my mother really didn't supervise me. And so when you're 14, you think that's a great opportunity. So I wasn't really crazy about going to live with my father, who had become religious. And I had to go to school every day. I had to go to church on Sunday. I had to go to church on Wednesday night. I had to go to church, Pioneer Girls on Monday night. It was like, oh my gosh, who does this? And so I wasn't happy. For those who are stepmoms, my stepmother was an angel to take these 3 kids in. My mother made us leave with nothing but the clothes on our back and our dog. That's all we could take with us. So they had to buy us everything when we moved into their home. And it was an adjustment, but my mother continued to be herself. And we didn't have a lot of visitation, a lot of contact with her. Didn't invite her to my wedding. She never saw my first child being born, and she continued to act out. She moved away, but it was hard because as I became a Christian myself and committed my life to the Lord and went to school to become a social worker, I began to ask myself these questions like, all right, the Bible says to forgive and forget, and that love keeps no record of wrongs, and that I'm to honor my parents. Do I let my mother see my children? What if she harms them like she harmed me? I can't do that. That's not a good steward of my kids. But I'm supposed to forgive and not keep bringing up the past. And what do I, all the things that we've learned in traditional teaching, I was scared of that. I was scared of that because she still wasn't stable. And so we didn't have any contact for 15 years, but I had a baby. And I worked in a hospital as a social worker who was starting to implement some of the child abuse regulations that had become more prevalent in the 70s. And so I had this little baby and he was colicky. He was up all night. He was exhausting, not because he was a bad kid, but just because he had little gas and stuff that he couldn't help. And I didn't know how to deal with it. I could begin to see that you could get that angry, that you could throw your kid in the crib and whack their neck back, or you could just shake them because you're so upset. And I never did any of that, but I did do one incident of abusive behavior. And this was when he was 2. I was shopping with him. I was trying to get some new non-maternity clothes because I'd finally lost my maternity weight. And I was in a little boutique by my house. It was a dressing room. Of course, there were a couple other dressing rooms. It was a small store. And 2-year-old little boys don't like being in the dressing room, confined to a stroller with their mothers, changing clothes. It's boring. And so he started throwing a fit, and he got out of his stroller and he threw on, got on the floor and started, I want to go home. I want to go home. And I was so embarrassed by his behavior because everybody in the boutique could hear him. And I wasn't being a good mother. And so I reached down and I grabbed his arm and I shook him to his feet and I said, "Stop it right now." And he looked at me with his big blue eyes, tears rolling down his face like he had just been hit with a lightning bolt. And he said as loud as he could, "Ah, you broke my arm." And his little elbow was dangling. His bottom half of his arm was dangling from his elbow. Terrified, I thought, oh my gosh, I've become my mother. And I took him to the emergency room where I worked as the social worker, confessed my sin to the doctor. I pulled his arm out and broke it. He said, "It's not broken. There's a joint in here and it becomes loose for some kids and it's called nursemaid's elbow." And he just popped it back in. Thank God. But it was a wake-up call for me that, boy, as much as I didn't want to be my mother and I didn't want to do what she did, there I went. The difference between an abusive incident, which we're all capable of, and an abusive pattern is that I never repeated that because I said, whoa, I need to learn to control myself versus he was a bad kid. And if he wouldn't have been acting out, I wouldn't have done that. He was a kid. He was a kid. That's what kids do. It was my job to be mature enough and emotionally stable enough to handle that in a good way. And I wasn't. And that really woke me up like a bucket of cold water.
I'm sure that story can be easily related to for every parent, and especially the background that you unfortunately came from. And it speaks to the need for us to get our own healing. And I appreciate your transparency in telling that story, Leslie. So many of us come out of these relationships. Some of us come out of our childhood as well, deeply wounded. How do we help ourselves heal?
I think one of the first things is you have to have a shift in mindset. So some of us who have been truly victimized, like I was, or maybe your listeners have been victimized as a child, can tend to grow up feeling like there's nothing I can do. I actually need someone to rescue me because I'm helpless to change my own life. And we grow up feeling this, like we're damaged goods. We don't know what to do. We can't help ourselves. And even psychologist Martin Seligman did a study with dogs, and he had them had an electric shock, and they jumped over to the other side. Of course, anybody would want to get away from injury. But then they weren't able to, they weren't allowed to jump. And so they learned that there was nothing they could do. They were helpless. They couldn't get away from the shock. And then these same dogs were put in a different pen where my have a
Right.
puppy barking.
Right on cue. You're telling dog stories.
Yeah. Be quiet. And so the dog was barking and barking. The dog was trying to jump over the other side, and it learned it couldn't do that. And so then the researchers had to teach those dogs how to relearn to protect themselves, how to get out of that situation. And so sometimes we have this victim mindset that says, I can't, and I need someone else to rescue me. You may need someone to guide you, but ultimately, if you're damaged by someone else, just like if my mom damaged my arm or my mom broke out my teeth, the only person who can fix my teeth are me. And me going to the dentist. She can't fix it for me. I have to take responsibility for that. They're my teeth. It's my life. It's my story. And so I would say the first shift is, oh my gosh, I have to do the work of healing the damage someone else did to me. Like if someone hit you with a car, you still have to go to intensive care. You still have to go to physical therapy. You still have to do the work. So instead of waiting for someone to do it for you, no one can do this work for you. You have to do your own work to heal. And so that's the first step of accepting that. It's unfair, it stinks, it's not right, but it is the way it is. And the more you accept that, the quicker you can do your work instead of getting angry that you have to do the work. So that would be the first step. The second step is really educate yourself, because there is this damaged goods, like I'm so broken, I'm uniquely broken, I feel so much shame at my brokenness that I don't feel as good as, or I don't feel worth it, or I don't feel like I'm enough. And I think educating yourself, even hearing other people's stories, like I've shared with Ryan, helps you to say, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. We do a lot of educational and support groups with women in destructive marriages who recognize, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. My husband treats me this way. My husband treats me the same way. And it's like, oh, this isn't about me. This is about their brokenness, and they don't know how to handle their own emotions and their own feelings and their own disappointments, but they're taking it out on me, just like I might have taken it out on Ryan, or my mother took it out on me. It wasn't my fault she acted that way. I was a kid. It was her brokenness. And that's why we need CORE, to be able to be courageously committed to the truth and work on ourselves. So educate yourself about what healthy is and what unhealthy is. And if you see yourself in unhealthy, own it. Own it. We all have unhealthy elements to ourselves, even unhealthy eating habits or unhealthy taking care of ourselves habits. If you see that in yourself and you don't like that about yourself, you can change that, but you need some support. I don't think God has wired us to change all by ourselves. He's wired us to have connection and community. And so support. So first, shift your mindset. I've got to do something. Second, get some information about what to do. And then get some support and accountability so that you actually can take the steps to do that, whether that's professional support and coaching or counseling, or just peer support and getting a group of women that hold each other accountable to the goals that you have and growth goals.
I love that. I love the fact that you mentioned being rescued. And I think I have seen, and you have seen, men and women who are continually waiting to be rescued by someone else to make it right, instead of doing their inner work. And many people don't know how to do their inner work, so I'm not faulting them at all. But that pursuit of a rescuer, except for the Lord Jesus, is going to take us into all types of difficult and unhealthy relationships. And could you speak to that some?
Yeah, we're waiting for our healing to come at the hands of our abuser. Like I need him to say, I'm sorry. One of the things that really helped me to begin to heal is when I began to define my problem. My mother had a problem. She was abusive to me. She was an alcoholic. She was, bipolar. And I kept trying to fix her problem, even as a Christian counselor. Mom, you need to go to a psychiatrist. Mom, you need to stop drinking. Mom, you need to go to AA. Meanwhile, my problem was, I don't know how to deal with my mother. I'm getting more and more bitter and resentful. I can't function. I'm not being a good parent myself. Those were my problems to deal with. And yet I was so busy trying to fix her problem, I wasn't taking responsibility for my problem. And so once I was able to see that and say, wait a minute, my problem is I'm filled with anger and bitterness. My problem is I want my mother to love me. She never has. She never will. I've got to accept that reality. Stinks, but it's true. And I'm going to walk in the truth. And once I could walk in the truth and accept that, I'm not going to change her. I'm not going to fix her. I'm not going to heal her. I got to work on me. That was very freeing. And it gave me power to take ownership back over my life. And that doesn't mean you do it all by yourself. If I needed physical therapy, if I owned that I needed physical therapy, I'd have to go to physical therapy and get physical therapy. Or when I want wisdom, I can't drum up wisdom all by myself. I go to God's word and read Proverbs every day. Those are the things that we can do to get what we don't have and what we don't know, but we have to do them. Nobody else is going to do that for us.
So important for our healing. And I know that you work with thousands of women in your core groups and helping them overcome destructive marriages and helping them find their core strength. And I am grateful for your work in doing that. Would you, Leslie, give us some tools on how to respond to a former spouse when he or she does things in front of the children or they undermine our authority as a parent?
So here's again where it's really important that you accept reality. So I had to accept reality that my mother's not a safe person. She's not a safe person for me to leave my children with. I'm not going to have this loving, wonderful Christmas, Mother's Day. It's not going to happen. It's not unreasonable for me to want that or to even expect it on a normal mother, but it's unrealistic to expect it from my mother. So I kind of chuckle to myself sometimes when I'm hearing women that I work with, they've just, they're getting a divorce from a destructive, abusive man. And they say, well, I hope we can have an amicable divorce. I'm thinking, you didn't have an amicable marriage. You're not going to have an amicable divorce. It's just not possible with someone who's contentious and divisive and wants to win and get their way all the time. It's not possible to be amicable with one of those kind of people. And so when we can accept reality, Jesus accepted reality. Judas wasn't going to change. He had a conversation with him. He wasn't going to change. The Pharisees the same way. And he didn't beat himself up like, what did I do wrong? Somehow I didn't say it right. He just accepted that each person has agency to make decisions for themselves. So I think accepting reality that just because you separated from somebody who's been destructive or abusive doesn't mean that behavior is going to stop. So what you have to do is, what boundaries do I need to put in place for my protection and possibly for your children's protection in order to have the least amount of damage? That would be one thing that you need to learn. The second thing that you need to learn is strategy. The Bible tells us, be as shrewd as serpents, but innocent as doves. And I've pondered that passage a lot because he's talking about to his disciples, when you're going out, not everybody's going to receive you and not everybody's going to love you the way you want them to. And he even tells us in Matthew 7, don't cast your pearl before swine, that sometimes you can't expect swine to treat your pearls with the respect that they should have. So don't keep putting them out there. So if you share your pearls, your heart with someone, and they keep trashing it and blaming you and accusing you and attacking you, don't do that. Be shrewder than that. So what I would say for a parent who's parenting with someone that they haven't been able to stay married to because of their stuff, that it's very important that you not expect them to be any better or different than they've always been, first of all. Second of all, you learn to be shrewd in the way that you deal with them. And so there's different strategies for that. So I can't say for sure anything, but I'll give one. Let's say that you were married to a narcissistic kind of man who always has to win and always has to be right. For you to try to get him to do it differently, you are wasting your breath. So what you could do strategically, let's say you want the kids for Christmas and if you say that, if you say, I'd really like the kids for Christmas, you know what's going to happen. He's going to say, well, I want the kids for Christmas because he wants to win and he wants to hurt you. So you might have to be more shrewd about what you disclose and what you don't disclose. That would be one thing. If he is bad mouthing you in front of the children, one of the things that's important to do is tell your children the truth. All right. You want your children to know the truth. And that doesn't mean you have to say all the dirty details of what he is or what he's done or your dad watches porn, any of those kind of things. But if you catch wind of what he's said that's about you, that's not true. For example, mom's breaking up our family. Okay. Then, dad says, you're breaking up the family. You won't forgive him. And you can say, that's how daddy feels. But actually, that's not true. Daddy broke up the family when he did, when he didn't tell me the truth, or when he decided to leave, or he decided to do certain things that were really hurtful. And daddy's not willing to change those things, or daddy's been doing these things over and over again, and he's not willing to change. And so he's broken the family. I'm just not going to pretend anymore that it's not broken. It is broken. Or I'm not having an affair. Daddy may say that because he's angry. People say things when they're angry. You don't have to call dad a liar, any of those kind of things. But the truth is, I'm not having an affair. Or dad says you're taking all his money. I don't have any ability to take all of dad's money. The judge decides who gets what in our assets. Dad and I are trying to talk about it, but if we can't make a decision, then the judge will decide. So you're going to instruct your children with the facts of the matter appropriate to their age level, just like you would if they were asking questions about sex. You wouldn't tell them a fantasy story like the stork brought your brother. You would tell them the truth at whatever developmental level they were capable of understanding the truth. Like the baby's coming out of my tummy. You may not say all of the details, but that's how it's coming.
Right. Yeah. I love that of telling the truth. And when you have those difficult conversations of really just a lot of prayer about it and how you relay that information. I know when I'm coaching folks, we say, just stick to the facts. Any communication with him or her, stick to the facts. There's no more need for emotional conversation. And that will restore a lot of peace in your life in doing that. Leslie,
there's an acronym, BIF, brief, informative, firm, and friendly. So you don't get into any emotional discussions. And if he says some emotional things like, didn't you ever love me? Or why did you, cheat on me? Or why, whatever, you just don't answer those. Brief, hey, the kids are coming over Sunday. I'll drop them off at 2:00. I'll pick them up at 4:00. Thanks a lot. Bye. Very brief, informative, firm, and friendly.
It restores a lot of peace in the household. It does indeed. Leslie Vernick, this has been just a delight, and I appreciate you so much in all of the ministry that you do. The resources, the books are amazing and have helped so many women primarily, but also some men. So thank you for your time with us today.
You're so welcome. Thanks for asking me, Kathy.
Hi, I'm Ginger, and Kathy asked me to share a little bit about my story as a child of divorce. I was in my teens when my parents started to get divorced, and I grew up a military brat. So I was an only child. So the three of us were a very tight nuclear family as we traveled the world, and my dad served in the service. When we got back to stateside, my dad got out of the military. Their marriage started to end and crumble in high school. And as it went on, when they finally did get divorced after several years of separation, I think one of the more disturbing pieces for me was that no one wanted to talk about my childhood, all these fabulous adventures that we had had as a family in Europe and in London and all over the whole world. And they just didn't want to talk about it at all. And neither of them would get out pictures or talk about our visits to the Kukenhof Gardens. And for me, it was really sad because I was an only child. There was no one else there to reflect it with me besides them. It felt like my entire childhood had been erased. And I had a lot of happy memories of us together as a family.
Thank you, Ginger. You will hear more from Ginger throughout this seminar, short clips of how her parents' divorce affected her. Leslie Vernick brought us many things to think about. And just to summarize, she talked about us stewarding our own life first, because we have to be healthy before we can be a healthy parent. So if you were thinking, I can do this on my own, I can independently get through my divorce, I plead with you not to consider that an option. You need other people. You need the wisdom of other people. You need to hear yourself process through what you're dealing with in a safe environment, a place where other people understand what you are stating, or you hear others articulate your pain that you couldn't find the words for. I know that Leslie's emphasis is working with women, but let me just state, she has acknowledged many times as I've been working with her that men also go through abusive marriages. And she would acknowledge that. And I have worked with several men who come from abusive relationships. So this is not only women, but yet the majority are women. And Leslie does focus on those in particular, not to slight men, because their pain is equally as devastating. I hope as you've listened to Leslie Vernick today, you have come to the realization that you need to be healed in working through the trauma of divorce. And I hope that you will take just one step of reaching out to get the support that you need going through the trauma of divorce.